Okay, we have practice from 3C. So this is simplifying with imaginaries in the denominator. All right, so the whole deal is you cannot have, the reason why we're doing this, you cannot have an imaginary in the denominator with it simplified. Cannot happen. So first thing you need to do is check out the denominator. Is it a monomial or a binomial? One term or two? Well, there's only one term there. 3i. Terms are joined by additions and subtractions. When it's only a monomial denominator, you only multiply by, you just have to multiply the numerator and denominator by I. Reason why you're multiplying by I is I divided by I is 1. When you multiply anything by 1, you're going to get the same value, 1 divided by 3i. So we're not changing the value of this problem. We're just multiplying it to get it into a form with no imaginary in the denominator. So you multiply 1 times I is I, so we're multiplying across the numerators. Multiply across the denominators. 3i times I is 3i squared. After you multiply, you look to simplify. Can we simplify anything with the numerator? Nope. Can we simplify anything in the denominator? Yes, the I squared. I squared is equivalent to -1. So this is 3 times I squared, so it'll really be 3 times -1. So our denominator becomes -3. Our numerator stays at I. And that's your final answer. If you don't like the negative in the denominator, you can slide it up to the numerator. -I over 3, that would be fine too. Number 2, looking at the denominator. I is the denominator, that's a monomial, one term. So we're going to multiply again by I over I. Look at our numerator here, 2 plus 5i, so that's a binomial. So when we multiply the numerators, we're going to have to distribute this I. So it's 2 times I is 2i. I times 5i is 5i squared. In the denominator, I times I, that's I squared. Carrying this down, let's look at our numerator. Simplifying 2i, nothing. You have 5i squared. I squared is -1. 5 times -1 is -5. I'm going to write that first, just a real and then imaginary, and that's a positive 2i, because it's a plus here. In the denominator, we have an I squared, that's a -1. We're going to replace that with -1, so it's divided by -1. And we really should probably simplify, we should simplify this. So it's -5 divided by -1 is +5. And 2i divided by -1, so you're dividing both terms by that -1, is -2i. Really, you're just changing the signs. And so this will be your final answer, 5 minus 2i. And there's no denominator, ends up going away. All right, next one, number 3. We have a binomial denominator, 2 terms. It's joined by, so it's -10 is one term, and then 5i is another. It's joined by a plus. When you have a binomial denominator, we're going to need to multiply by the binomial, but the conjugate of it. So that's changing the value of the middle sign. A lot of times we'll say the imaginary, change the sign of the imaginary. So it's -10 minus 5i. -10 minus 5i. Again, this is equivalent, what we're multiplying by is equivalent to 1. It's a weird looking 1, but that is 1. So we're really not changing the value of this problem, the value of the original expression. All right, when we multiply this out, I ran a room over there, so I put parentheses around any binomial I have just to show that kind of helps me think that I need to distribute. So in the numerator, when you multiply the numerators out, we have 5i times -10 is a -50i. 5i times a -5i is a -25i squared. So that's our numerator. Denominator, you just got to be careful and go slow. -10 times -10 is +100. -10 times -5 is negative times a negative is a +550i. Then let's multiply the +5i times -10 is a -50i. +5i times a -5i is a -25i squared. After you multiply, it's always the next step is to simplify. So in looking at your numerator, what's in your numerator that you can simplify? You have this I squared. I squared is -1. By now, you should be pretty used to that. So we have -25 times -1 is a positive 25. And then we have a minus 50i. I'm just putting the real number first, then the imaginary. If you don't, it's okay. That's the way it should be written, but if you don't have it, it's not something I'm going to mark wrong. So we have 50i minus 50i. Those will simplify. They go away. And again, we have this I squared. I squared is -1 equals -1. So we have -25 times -1, which is positive 25. And ultimately here we have 100 plus 25. That's a positive 25, so plus 25 is 125. Well, here's our simplified answer, as in got all our like terms together. But now the last step is, let's look at all of our coefficients of each term. And each of those can be divided by the same number. And it's actually a pretty big number, 25. If you divide each term by 25, you get down to 1 minus 2i over 5. And that is the simplified answer. Hopefully you got it. All right, next we have divide. So I just put some words in here. It's not meant to be too tricky. Just thinking word wise. You divide. So I'm just gonna write it out. And we multiply. So the denominator is a binomial again. It's all about the denominator. It's a binomial, so we need to multiply by the conjugate. So -4 plus 2i, -4 plus 2i. All right, well, let's look at our numerators now. We have every binomial, I'm just gonna put in parentheses, every single one helps me kind of get me jump started mentally of I need to distribute. When you have a binomial times a binomial, you got to multiply every term by every term. So let's start that out. And I'm gonna write this down below because it's gonna get a little longer, but we can do it. -9 times -4 is positive 36. -9 times 2i, so that's -18i. -2i times -4 is a positive 8i. -2i times positive 2i is a -4i squared. 4 terms in our numerator. When you have binomial times binomial, there should be 4 terms. 2 times 2 is 4. And let's look at our denominator. -4 times -4 is positive 16. -4 times a positive 2i is a -8i. Now let's distribute the second term. -2i times -4i is positive 8i. Those middle terms are going to cancel. That's awesome. -2i times a -2i is a -4i squared. All right. Let's look at simplifying our numerator and our denominator. First, don't fall victim to this where you think that these can simplify out. It has to be a multiplication for you to simplify numerators and denominators. Has to be. Or all the terms in all of every term. So every single term has to be divisible by the same, which they actually are. You could divide it out if you want right now. But I think the easier way to look at this is let's just simplify the numerator. So now I'm just looking at the numerator and seeing what can we simplify. So I see I squared, that's -1. -4 times -1 is a positive 4. So it's going to end up being positive 4 here at the end. Plus 36 is 40. And then -18i plus 8i is a -10i. So that's our numerator. Denominator, let's look at that. So now I'm just concentrated on the denominator. That's where my eyes are located, are looking at. Our middle terms simplify. I squared is -1. -4 times -1 is a positive 4. And we have 16 plus 4 is 20. Well, let's look here. At the very end, we can actually simplify all these. 40, 10, and 20 are all divisible by 10. So let's try that first. So 4, 1, and 2. So this is going to end up being 4 minus, you could do 1i or just I, because I times 1 is I, divided by 2. And there's your final answer. And the last one, fill in the blanks. These are not meant to be super challenging. Just need to see some of these problems, so then you can know how to approach them on a test. Look at your denominator. Denominator is binomial. So what do we have to do? We have to multiply by the conjugate, negative 7 plus 3i. And multiply the numerator too. After it's all multiplied out, it should be correct to multiply it out. We need to simplify it. So now the last step, the blanks you need to fill in, are the simplified parts. So I have I squared, that's negative 1. Negative 18 times negative 1 is positive 18. And so we have negative 7 plus 18. Negative 7 plus 18 is 11. So it should be 11 in there. And 3i plus 42i is a 45i, so that's good. The denominator, see, middle terms will simplify out. We have 49. I squared is negative 1. Negative 9 times negative 1 is positive 9. So 49 plus 9 is 58. If it doesn't fit in the blank, it's okay. You can just write it down below. And that's your practice for today.